we all have a resilient story, right? Most of us have, a whole library of resilient stories. It's like, which one do you want? Take it off the shelf.
Yeah.
So help people identify what is a resilience story that they have, and how can we effectively tell that in a way that allows us to take a step toward combating the vulnerability bias and enhancing our level of authenticity and empathy at work.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Taryn Marie Stejskal, who's been recognized as the world's #1 resilience, mental health, and well-being expert. In this episode, we discuss the 5 practices of highly resilient people, as well as why, when presented with challenges, some people flourish and some fold. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Welcome to the show, Taryn. How are you?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here with you. How about you?
I'm not too bad. Well, after watching your videos, the podcast, the TEDx, I feel like I've been stalking you online for a long while now. So it's nice to see you and hear from you.
You seem
How's
like a
things been?
very kind stalker.
Yeah, but I always leave a like. I hit the like button. I leave some comments. So I want to contribute as well. But it's always cool. Like one of the things I love about my job is I get to hear, and from great leaders like yourself, and then have the opportunity to have a conversation. So I feel very lucky to be able to do that. I know you probably know the same experience for your own podcast. Do you get to have conversations with amazing leaders as well? So we're pretty lucky.
Absolutely. And I feel very fortunate to be here with you. I mean, this is it's an incredible show that you've built. You have the highest level people from global organizations coming and having conversations about how they're thinking about the future of work and HR. So it's a tremendous honor to be here with you as well.
No, I appreciate it. Well, to be honest, no one's here for me. They're here for the great guests. So without the guests, there is no show. So that's with people like you giving up your time and willing to give back, there is no HR Leaders podcast. So I appreciate everyone. Well, tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and your journey to where we are now and the work that you do.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So there's so many journeys that I could talk to you about today, but I'll talk to you about my resilience journey. So today I'm considered to be the #1 international expert on resilience, well-being, and mental health. And a lot of people say to me, well, how do you get to be the #1 international expert on resilience? And it all started 20 years ago. So I've been studying how we effectively address challenge, change, and complexity as humans for 2 decades. And this started in graduate school. So I'll give you just a little snapshot of how this began. So in graduate school, we were doing this qualitative study with women who lived in rural areas and had some level of financial or food insecurity. And what we found after conducting interviews for 3 consecutive years was the women and their families that had transportation in these rural areas, make sense, grocery stores, um, medical care, jobs, they're all far away and there's not public transportation. So the people that had transportation, they were able to demonstrate the most resilience and to get out of poverty or to get out of financial or food insecurity. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And then a couple years later, I started working with people that had brain injuries and spinal cord injuries. And when these people sat in our outpatient clinic, I was there as a fellow in neuropsychology. I noticed something that was both troubling and surprising. The people that sat in front of me in our outpatient clinic, when I looked at their prognosis for their injury that had occurred weeks, months, or sometimes even years before, our prognosis was almost always wrong. And so I thought, what's going on? People are either doing better than we think or not as well as we think, but we're not hitting the mark.
Mm.
So, as you do in an academic teaching hospital, we unpacked the data, we looked at what was happening with all of these patients, and we found something, again, that was both simple and powerful. The people that had access to reliable transportation
No way.
were the ones, statistically speaking, It was the difference between living independently and living in an assisted care facility. And we all know how important our independence is to us. So I was like, wait, wait, wait. These women in Maryland, transportation was the key. These people that had brain injuries and spinal cord injuries, completely different group of people, seemingly nothing in common. Transportation. So then I thought, I wish I could tell you that I put this together overnight. Took many years. But I was like, hold on. Transportation is transformative in these moments of challenge. So then I thought, okay, we're not all going to have brain injuries or spinal cord injuries, but isn't facing challenge, change, and complexity the fabric of what it means to be human, right? If we're all going to have a shared experience, that's it. So if we know transportation works in these situations, maybe there's a common thread for all of us that when we face these moments of challenge, we could do something that would allow us to create a more positive and productive outcome. And so now, having interviewed hundreds of people and collected thousands of pieces of data on how people effectively address challenge, that's given rise to our framework, the 5 practices of highly resilient people, or the 5 things any of us can do anytime we face challenge to create a more positive and productive outcome.
Love that. Such a cool story as well. And I love the fact that those pieces came together over time as well. And I'm interested to know, especially over the last 2 years, have you been surprised by the level of resilience that you've seen in people during the pandemic and the social uprising and everything else that's going on? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing.
Yeah, that is such a great question. And what I would say is, I've been surprised that people are surprised by their resilience.
Okay.
And let me tell you what I mean by that. So, interviewing hundreds of people about how they effectively faced some of the most significant challenges in their life, right? Um, Significant health diagnoses, the loss of a family member, layoffs, all of these things that we go through. I've heard these stories of resilience time and time again, where people talked about even surprising themselves with their level of capability and strength and skill. And I think what I didn't appreciate until we were in this global pandemic and we've been in these moments for the last 2.5 years of, large scale, health concerns, gun control, significant changes in policy. Right now, I'm like, oh, I see that we didn't all know just how resilient we actually are, that it's the essence of what it means to be human. And so I've been surprised about how surprised people are at their inherent strength and wisdom and capability.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I saw that a lot in like friends, family members who had never really, well, they've had to face adversity, but we all faced a lot of adversity, and I think a lot of people did surprise themselves how resilient they really are, and I think a misconception I hear and see from many of them is they don't understand that that's something you can develop. It's a muscle, right? That you can build. Would you agree with that?
That's exactly right. And actually, we have a number of myths of resilience that we've uncovered or that I've uncovered in my research and now we share through my company. And one of those myths is just what you said, is this sort of idea of like a duality or a dichotomy of like either we're resilient or we're not, right? That's the myth. The truth is that we are all resilient. You know, resilience is actually the essence of what it means to be human, coming into the world, taking our first breath. I mean, if you think about it, you and I were chatting about the evolution of the work that you're doing over the course of the last 6 years. You know, we've faced every fear, every disappointment, every anxiety, every setback, and still we're here. And yet we question our resilience or how resilient we are. I think it's an opportunity to really understand the true power and that resilience is tied to and the essence of what it means to be human.
Mm. What are some of the other myths? Now you kind of made me intrigued. What are some of the
I'm
other
so
myths?
I'm so glad you asked because the myths are really important for us to understand because oftentimes buying into these myths without even realizing it, it blocks our ability to recognize or harness our resilience to a great extent. So one myth that I talk about a lot, in addition to that last one about sort of the duality or the dichotomy, um, is this idea, the myth is that we bounce back. I can't tell you how many times I've heard bounce back as being connected with resilience. Well, we're not sort of Rubbermaid containers, right? Where you dent us and then we spring back into form. And so, many of your audience members, Chris, by virtue of being in HR and focused on leadership and human development and capability are familiar with this concept of neuroplasticity,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm sure you are too. And it's just at a high level, the idea that our neurons in our brain are constantly regenerating, rewiring, or regrouping, right, and refocusing themselves to mirror essentially our external experience, right? And so what that means is anything that happens to us, this interview that we're having together, and anyone who's listening to it, our neurons are changing as a result of this experience. We're fundamentally and forever changed by every experience that we have. So, why would we ever expect to go back to the way we were after challenge, change, or complexity? We don't go back to a prior form. So the myth is we bounce back. The truth is we bounce forward. Hopefully, in the best case scenario, the definition of resilience is we effectively face challenge and we allow ourselves to be enhanced over time by having had that experience not diminished. So
Hmm.
rather than bouncing back, the truth is we change form and we bounce forward.
Yeah. No, I love that because for many years I used to see sort of challenging times in my life as a weakness. For example, growing up pretty poor, my mom's a single parent with 4 kids. We didn't have much growing up, very struggled a lot. My lack of education, didn't go to school, college, university, barely went through high school, and many, many other things. But I realized later on down the line is going through those hard times and struggle is what built that resilience. And so I wouldn't say I bounced back. I would say I bounced forward and learned from that, and it made me who I am today, and allowed me to be where I am today. But for many, many years, I saw all of those things as like something to be ashamed of or
Hmm.
embarrassed of.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it makes perfect sense, actually. And we have this whole section in our book that's coming out next year about um, challenge, right? And wow, the way we think about challenge is so fascinating. It's so many of the things that you just said. So I'm so glad that you brought this up because so many people believe that we should be able to engineer challenge out of our lives, right? Like if we're strategic enough, if we're intelligent enough, if we see around corners enough, if we, you know, look at the sort of leading indicators or disruptors in our marketplace, we should be able to engineer a challenge out of our lives. And with that belief, then it's just what you said, which is okay, if I should be able to engineer a challenge out of my life, then if I actually experience challenge, I've done something wrong. There's shame associated with the fact that I face challenge, right? And that's not true at all either, right? Not only are we not able to engineer a challenge out of our life, we shouldn't, because challenge is what amplifies our resilience. We learn so much more about ourselves, who we are, what's important to us, our strength, our skill, our wisdom in the midst of those proverbial rainstorms than we do on those sunny days when we're in a moment of success and everything is going right.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that leads quite nicely on to some of the habits and practices you talk about in the book. I think the 5 practices of highly resilient people, why some flourish and others fold. One of the things that surprised me when I saw the word vulnerability. And it kind of links nicely on what we just spoke about. And I was surprised to see that, if I'm being honest, the vulnerability in there, because again, being vulnerable, understanding that we're not perfect, that we are going to make mistakes. I'd love for you to elaborate more on that. Was that a surprise to you, by the way, or was that something you're
It
already?
was I'm so glad that you asked that. It was a huge surprise to me, and it was also a tremendous call to action. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So, the 5 practices of highly resilient people spring out of those hundreds of people that I've now interviewed about how they effectively faced their most significant challenges, and the other kind of thousands of pieces of data, interviews, blogs, film articles, white papers that I've researched as well. And so when I looked at all of this in aggregate, what I found is there's 5 things that anytime we face challenge, we can engage in these 5 practices and create a more positive and productive outcome. And so the first practice that emerged is, as you said, vulnerability. And I was tremendously um, frightened by this. I was convicted by this. I was surprised by this. And it was a call to action for me. So, first, I'll tell you what vulnerability is, at least in the context of the work that I've done, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what vulnerability is as well. So, vulnerability in my work is allowing our inside self, right? Our thoughts, our feelings, our experience to the greatest extent possible to match the outside self that we share with the world. Okay. In psychology, we call this congruence, right? Our inside self matches our outside self. Now, there's all kinds of reasons that we don't do this, right? It's a new environment. We're at work. We're on a first date. We're trying to be interesting, to people. So, allowing our inside self to match our outside self in terms of thoughts, feelings, and experience, this is a lifelong journey. Okay. But this is vulnerability. This is allowing people to truly know and see us. And we'll do this to greater or lesser extents in different environments. Now, at work, this is important, okay? Because we talk, many workplaces talk about valuing vulnerability in the first place. So when you look at Project Aristotle, for example, with Google, and they looked at what are the components that create a high performing team, right? It was really 2 things, right? One, people shared with one another at a level of reciprocity. People were willing to be vulnerable with each other, and the people on the team were vulnerable back, right? And 2, as a result of that vulnerability or related to it, they believed that other people on their team had their back. There was a sense of psychological safety, right? So we know that vulnerability contributes to high performing teams relative to Project Aristotle. What we also know is that a number of organizations, even if they don't say they value vulnerability, they value authenticity and they value empathy. And by the way, these skills have only gotten more important in the last 2.5
Oh
years as we think
yes,
about
100%.
productivity. Yes. Think about productivity, we think about engagement, everything that everyone's going through, we want to know that the people around us are authentic, they're honest, that our leaders are authentic, and that people are empathetic, that they care about us and they care about us as people and what we're going through. So, vulnerability is the fertile ground from which authenticity and empathy grows. Because if you think about it just for yourself, we can't be authentic without tapping into something that's vulnerable first, something true at that level. And we can't be empathetic without tapping into something vulnerable that's true for us at that level. So, vulnerability is the fertile ground from which we grow things like authenticity and empathy. Okay, so Brene Brown also talks about vulnerability in her work around, living a wholehearted life. So, Chris, why aren't we all running around living our most fabulous vulnerable lives, right?
Yeah, I think it's like a protection mechanism. People are worried about, are they going to like me? What are they going to think of me? Um, am I portraying a role that someone sees as strength because I want to be promoted to this position? so many different things. I feel like people,
Ding, ding, ding.
yeah.
You're so right. And so now we have a word for it. Okay, so here's what emerged. It's exactly what you said, which is what I love. I love it when like science just mirrors your experience. So there's always a difference between knowing and doing, right? We know it's good to exercise. We know it's good to drink a certain amount of water every day. We know it's good to eat healthy food and to sleep a certain amount of hours. We don't always do it, even though we know it, right? So there's a difference between knowing and doing. We know vulnerability is good for us, but we're not all engaging in vulnerability. And part of the reason is just what you said. It's something called the vulnerability bias, which appears to be hardwired for us as humans. And what the vulnerability bias tells us, it's literally like a voice in our head that says, if you allow yourself to be known and seen,
Yeah.
the three L's will occur. People won't like you, they won't love you, and they might leave, right?
Mm.
That's the three L's. So we say to ourselves, well, I want people to like me. I want to get promoted. I want people to think good things about me. And I definitely don't want to be abandoned. So this vulnerability thing seems way too risky, and I'm just not going to do it, right? And it appears that the only way for us to sort of face this irrational fear of the vulnerability bias is to face the irrational fear of the vulnerability bias. So, one of the things that I do with teams is help people identify we all have a resilient story, right? Most of us have, a whole library of resilient stories. It's like, which one do you want? Take it off the shelf.
Yeah.
So help people identify what is a resilience story that they have, and how can we effectively tell that in a way that allows us to take a step toward combating the vulnerability bias and enhancing our level of authenticity and empathy at work.
Hmm. So how does that then? I know you've like if you could define it in a sentence, how does then vulnerability lead to us being more resilient?
Great question. So vulnerability, let me take a step back. So resilience is all about how we effectively face challenge, right? And so when we're vulnerable, when we allow our inside self to match to a greater extent the outside self we share to the world, then people know what's going on for us, right? They know that we're struggling with something.
I
They know
see.
that we're grappling with something rather than hiding it. And what happens? We get more social support. We get more
Which is
information.
where the resilience
We get
comes. Mm.
all those things, right? So this is a super sad way to think about it. Okay. But and you might have seen this, there was a UFC player who just came on in the UK, and a good friend of his had committed suicide,
Yeah, sorry, I
right?
watched it. You mean you
Yeah.
mean USB fighter, but it's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Pat. Yeah,
What did I say? Did I say player?
yeah, that's fine.
Oh,
Yeah, that's fine. And his name.
Bruno, edit that out. I meant fighter.
No, it's so it was Paddy Pimlet, and his friend
Hmm.
had committed suicide. Yeah, I saw it last weekend. Mm,
Yeah. And so
yeah.
this is a perfect example. I posted this on my Instagram
Hmm.
because he's saying in the like just most beautiful, heartfelt way, I'd rather have my mate cry on my shoulder than attend his funeral.
Yeah.
But this is hardwired, this vulnerability bias. If I tell people I'm grappling with something, they're not going to like me, they're not going to love me, they might leave. Folks are taking this to their grave,
Yeah.
you
Literally.
know,
Hmm.
literally,
Yeah.
right? And so when we can open up these conversations, we can say, hey, when you're in a moment of challenge, if we make vulnerability more okay, then people can get the help that they need, right?
Yeah.
So that, I always talk about resilience in leadership, like at work and in life, right? So that's in life. At work, it's like if we feel that our boss cares about us and has our back, right? We can go to them and say, hey, this project isn't working. Hey, I need some help. Hey, we're stuck here. Hey, we're behind schedule. And that allows us to more effectively face those challenges. Whereas if vulnerability, authenticity, and empathy are not valued, I'm going to stay quiet.
Yeah. No, I love that. love that. And second one is productive perseverance.
Productive perseverance. So this is the intelligent pursuit of a goal. So people ask me all the time, they say, is this idea, some people have heard of this concept of grit, right? So they say, is grit the same as resilience, right? And the answer is, it isn't. So productive perseverance is the intelligent pursuit of a goal. On the one hand, knowing when to pursue a goal, even when we face challenge, right? To be gritty, to put our head down. And on the other side, to recognize when continuing to go against challenge is actually demonstrating diminishing returns, and we need to pivot in a new direction, right? So if you think about companies like Blockbuster, for example, here in the United States,
Yeah.
Blockbuster was super gritty.
Yeah, the
They're like,
opposite.
we're going to make this happen. We're not going to buy Netflix. We don't need Netflix, right? And so that's a wonderful example. Now, persevering works really well when the environment isn't going to change. You want to be a Navy SEAL? Wonderful. You want to be a physician? Fantastic. You want to graduate from the Naval Academy? Amazing, right? There's a series of steps that you take and you put your head down and you face those challenges and you get it done. But in the marketplace that we've seen, especially in the past 2.5 years, putting our head down and plowing through isn't going to get the job done. We got to keep looking around because our environment keeps shifting and iterating and pivoting to match it. So what I talk a lot about in businesses, this is wonderful when we think about strategic planning, right? Because people say to me, well, can I still have a 3 to 5 year, vision or plan? You absolutely can, but don't just write it down and then check on it in 3 to 5 years, right? Have quarterly or, biannually touch points where we actually look at and say, okay, this is our 3 to 5 year vision. Are we on track to get there? Have members of our team that are constantly scanning the marketplace for disruptions and sort of, leading indicators that things are about, to change. Because when we think about productive perseverance, it's the intelligent pursuit of a goal, knowing when to maintain the mission and when to pivot. And so this is deeply important when we think about leaders, teams, and organizations and how we think about our strategic goals and planning.
Yeah. I think that one really resonated with me as like an entrepreneur of, part of what being an entrepreneur is you're trying new things out and yes, you persevere through, but there gets to a point where you have to assess, does this make sense? Are we just pushing for no reason? And I suppose an example of one that is a positive is this podcast. We spoke beforehand. I knew that it's going to take, years to build the show, the following. So I constantly persevered. The landscape hadn't changed, the topics, the content has, but we continue to do it and push through to where we are now. Whereas some of our business models and our products, we pivoted. We tried, we persevered, we went with, at some points we unfortunately did lead with grit, but then got to the point where we realized actually we need to switch directions. And if we had more of a strategic thinking like that you're talking about, we probably may have done that a lot sooner and a lot quicker, saved a lot of money and time and energy as well. So I really, really like that one. That really resonates a lot.
And I'll just add on to that. I love what you said, Chris, which is there's a prohibition that I think we have in our society, certainly here in the United States, and I believe to some extent globally, where we tell everyone, don't quit, don't quit, keep going, sometimes that works, but sometimes we need to quit. Sometimes we need to recognize when there's diminishing returns and pivot in a new direction. And so I think it's about really looking at like, what are those milestones or those moments, right? Like if we haven't monetized this product in 2 years, we're going to pivot in a new direction, or something to that extent, like having those kind of markers to say, we're not just going to keep banging our head against the wall in perpetuity, but knowing what are those moments, right?
Yeah.
Where we say, okay, if we don't get to this milestone, that's going to be a signal that we need to move in a slightly or largely different direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely setting expectations ahead of time of what does good look like, because otherwise you can get lost in there. What about connection? So that's the third. What do you mean by connection?
Yeah. So when we face challenge, connection is deeply important. This is something we've really been cultivating in our organizations these last couple of years in particular. And I've had so many conversations about how we create connection or deeper connections, virtually or in a hybrid, work environment. So connection, whenever I talk about this word, people always jump to um, connection with others, right? And that's important. But first and foremost, the connection that we get to cultivate is the connection with ourselves, right? It's about knowing our worth, knowing our value, knowing what we're good at, what are our strengths and talents, being able to articulate those, um, being able to listen to our intuition, trust ourselves, trust our gut. What happens for a lot of very high level executives that I coach is there's so much coming at leaders from their organization and from their teams all the time that they preferentially focus on all of those external connections. And what can get lost for people is that internal connection to ourselves, right? This is the like waking up at a certain age and being like, hold on, how did I get here? You know, this is the, I don't know who I am anymore, or I don't do the things that I used to enjoy anymore, right? So it's really about this connection that we have with ourselves. We talk a lot about burnout, exhaustion, and stress, right? Burnout, exhaustion, and stress occur when we stop listening to ourselves. When we say, you know what, I don't need all that sleep. I don't need to get that workout in. I'll just skip this meal, right? So staying connected to ourselves is first and foremost the greatest buffer and the greatest gift that we can give ourselves to stave off burnout, exhaustion, and stress, because those things are about minimizing our connection with ourselves in service of
Hmm.
everything else coming at us.
Yeah.
And then of course the external connections, that we have, our community, our peers, our teams, our workplaces, our family, our children, and our parents. And then navigating the inflection point. Like we all know, like our lives have all like poof, like all those connections have been heaped on top of one another. We're trying to work from home and our children need something. So also being able to parse out those connections and navigate all of the demands on us alongside allowing ourselves to still hear that voice within.
And I think we saw a lot of that, didn't we, during the last 2 years? We were talking about the Great Resignation, where people kind of had time to reflect and think and say, is this really what I want to be doing with my life? Is this aligned with my values? Is this aligned with my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, no, it's time to make a change. Or I can't imagine, I can't even, there's just so many people I could speak to that over the last 2 years have had a huge health change transformation. They had this sort of this moment, this wake up call, like, I'm going to get fit. Or, for
Mm-hmm.
example, one of my parents just after 40 years of smoking was like, this is a wake up call for my health and fitness. I'm stopping smoking. But it took a pandemic to really wake some people up to be like, is this really why I want to be living my life as well? So I love that. And of course, the resilience that comes along with that as well. Yeah, it's super interesting.
I love what you said there. And what I'd like to add on to what you said, this sort of space, that we've had in the last couple of years. Some people have been busier than others, and some people have really had time to like take a step back and evaluate their lives. When I was working at Cigna and I was leading global leadership development in all 86 of our countries, I took a number of senior executives to different countries that were part of our high potential programs. And I remember I took a group of executives to India, and we'd been there for a week and we'd seen a lot of really interesting things about innovation and various elements of how our market worked in that country. And on the last day, I decided that I was going to take every person's cell phone and I was going to put it in a basket. And I sent them all out with only a pen or a pencil and a notebook for an hour to reflect on their experiences and to, just be with themselves, right? I can't tell you how much pushback I got on people putting their cell
I was
phones
about to
in the
say, yeah, I bet they
basket,
had every reason
right?
possible.
Every reason possible for an hour, right? And then afterwards, when we came back and we debriefed the trip, and I asked people, what were some of the most powerful and influential moments for you? Without question, people said having that hour disconnected to just sit and think and be with themselves, it was tremendously difficult for some people, and it was so powerful. And we don't do that enough. We don't reflect enough and cultivate that connection with ourselves.
Yeah, it's tough. And sometimes the most difficult place to be is alone with your own thoughts. It kind of forces you to really take a look inside, right? And that's hard. So it's
Mhm.
so important, but it's
Mhm.
also difficult as well.
That's right.
I'm conscious of your time, so I want to get through the last two because I'm so excited to get into it. So number 4, what's number 4 in the book?
Number 4 is gratiosity. And this is a word that I made up
I know, right? That's
to.
why I let you say it because I thought I was going to get it
Ah!
wrong.
There's no like pronunciation in the dictionary. Yeah, I mean, it's like one of those things, as a both practitioner
I
and
was asking
as a
myself, I was saying
researcher.
it in my head and I was like, do I just not know this word? Okay. Love it.
So it's so fun. It really gives people pause. And, I just couldn't find a word in the English language to represent what people were sharing with me, right? And what I was hearing was, when we think about effectively facing challenge, the first part is gratitude, right? But not in the moment. We're not like, oh, great, my car broke down. I have a flat tire. The air conditioner stopped working. Like, yes, in that moment, we're like, crap, But after some time, when we reflect on it, even if we wouldn't have chosen that circumstance, oftentimes we're able to see the good in it, right? To say, okay, I didn't want my car to break down before that important meeting, but the fact that it did meant, I wasn't on the highway where this accident occurred, on my way to work. Or as a result, somebody picked me up and I've now formed like a lifelong friendship, right? So we can find the good in the circumstance, even if we wouldn't have chosen the experience. And the second half is generosity. And what this means is building on our vulnerability to share our stories of resilience generously with others. In the workplace, this allows others to learn from us vicariously. This is the richness of coaching and mentorship, of sharing these stories. It both solidifies our resilience, what we faced by retelling these stories, and it allows others to learn vicariously through our experiences. But rather than telling people what to do or giving advice, we get to use them in the context of coaching and mentorship.
Yeah. I love that. I think leading with gratitude is such a powerful. I remember sort of hearing about it many, many years ago, and I was thinking it's something really fluffy, and I was like, yeah, whatever. But now, our friend Chester Elton, Leading with Gratitude, one of his books, just I love to start my day now. I have a little reminder on my phone when I wake up, and so it kind of just prompts me. And I love even when I'm like just getting ready in the morning, brushing my teeth, just kind of both thinking it, but also saying out loud what I'm grateful for. It just
Mhm.
changes almost the whole chemistry in my body and my brain of how my day starts, and I end up having a great day.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then that spreads to my friends, my employees, and everyone around me as well. So yeah, it's super important.
That's right. And there's neuroscience to back that up. It's not that it just feels like it's changing the chemistry of your body. It is changing the chemistry of your body. And what that means, Chris, is the things that we think to ourselves, right? The areas where we choose to focus our thoughts and how we choose to think about our experience actually changes the chemistry of our body and our mood. And then to your point, you know, expands out not just to ourselves, but kernels of that then impact everyone that we interact with.
Yeah, I love the. I used to, for a while I had this on my wall. I had thoughts become things
Hmm.
written out on the wall, and it because it really did feel that the more I was projecting that into the universe or whatever you want to call it out there, it really felt like it was reciprocating and coming back to me as well. So yeah, it's very interesting. And then last one, possibility.
Possibility. Yeah. So I think a great segue between gratiosity and possibility is this idea that what we allow to matter, to be meaningful in our lives becomes matter, right? Like becomes physicality, right? So the energy that we give to the things that matter, like bringing a dream into the world or bringing a vision into existence, that actually becomes something physical in our environment when we first focus on it mentally. And so possibility is about, right? How do we bring those possibilities to life? So first and foremost, possibility is about focusing on progress over perfection, right? When I was at Nike leading executive leadership development for our C-suite and our top 400 vice presidents, one of the co-founders who founded Nike with Phil Knight, Bill Bowerman, had this amazing saying. He said, "We can't afford the luxury of perfection." And I thought about that. And I was like, right. Perfection is a luxury and the price is way too high because it's an unattainable standard, right? So possibility is not about perfection. That'll keep us small. That'll keep the standards too high and, you know, entice us to procrastinate because we're scared we can't do
Most
it,
people
right?
never
But
start.
focusing on that, what's that?
I said it causes a lot of people just to never start in the first
Exactly,
place.
exactly. It's like, whoa, like I can never do that. So
Yeah.
it's over before it starts.
Yeah, I
Right?
love that. I always say it to my friends because most people from the outside in, they don't see that journey. They just see the end goal and the success. But it's those small steps, and you kind of build momentum. It's like a snowball effect. If you try and, I remember like me and Shane always have this joke about our business plan. We created this amazing business plan, and this is what was going to happen, and none of that came true. We
Mhm.
pivoted left, right, up, down, side by side. What we do now and how we make money is completely different. So if we took that approach of perfection, we would never even have started in the first place, or definitely wouldn't have
Yeah.
got to where we are now. We've constantly have to be evolving and innovating and failing forward in many ways to be able to get to where you are. So I love that because so many people it paralyzes people, that pursuit of perfection. It doesn't make, and also to be honest, like you said earlier in our conversation, I love the failure because that's where I learn the most.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than me guessing what my customers want, I learn by putting something out there and they tell me,
Mm-hmm.
or I make a mistake personally, and then my team will inform me and say, actually, Chris, I think there's a better way. There's a mistake. I'm like, great, because otherwise you're
Mm-hmm.
in this guessing game and you never
Mm-hmm.
really know. So seeking discomfort is something we talk about in our company, and pushing forward is where the magic happens as well. Um,
I could not agree more. I could not agree more. I talk a lot with people about getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
yeah,
To push
yes,
outside.
being
Yeah.
comfortable. You got that's where the magic is. I love. Sometimes what terrifies me the most is when I'm not uncomfortable. Because I'm like,
Mm,
I'm like, what's going wrong? I'm like, then I'm like, what's wrong? And you also
mm-hmm.
build that as a muscle as well. Like, I love being in discomfort to a certain extent because I know that means I'm making progress. But listen, I would love to. I feel like we needed to do a part 2, break this episode up. There's so much to talk about. I didn't even get through half my questions, but I've really enjoyed the episode and talking to you, and I'm so excited for the book. When can we expect it? Do we have a scheduled date?
We have a pub
We
day. I'm
do.
so
Amazing.
excited. Um, writing a book, I always knew was a tremendously um big, undertaking. And I really have an even greater perspective for that now after all the, book proposal and editing, everything that we've gone through. So I'm so delighted. So our book, The 5 Practices of Highly Resilient People, Why Some Flourish and Others Fold, that will be out April of 2023. We're publishing with this amazing global company by the name of Hachette, and we're publishing with Brene Brown's editor from Daring Greatly. So I'm so excited about this partnership and to bring this work, to the world, to take it out of the hands of the sort of elite few where I get to do consulting and executive coaching and keynote speaking and really democratize, because I think it's so important for all of us to know, given that challenge is the fabric of our lives and resilience is the essence, what are the 5 things we can all do to create a more positive and productive outcome? So I'm just delighted and honored to be bringing this book into the world.
Love it. And last thing is, where can people connect with you if they want to reach out to you, work with you personally, grab a copy of the book? Where's the best place?
Absolutely. So we have a podcast as well, as you mentioned, called
Yes.
Flourish or Fold, Stories of Resilience, which is where well-known people have an opportunity to share their peek behind the scenes, all of the challenge, right? That's behind the curtain of the success, that everyone sees, which I think is deeply important. And to communicate with me, you can grab me on our website, which is resilience with a C dash leadership.com. And messaging me through Instagram works too, which is Dr. Taryn Marie.
Amazing. And for everyone, as always, those links are already below to make your life easy. So wherever you're watching or listening, if you click the link in description, all of those links would be there. I'll also say definitely connect over on LinkedIn as well, because you put some great content out on LinkedIn. So follow Taryn there. But thank you so much for all the work you do. I love this topic. I love the work you're doing. I can't wait to get my hands on the book. And I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thank you so much. Well, signed copy coming your way on April 19th.
Love it. See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye.